Welcome to the Startup Grind.
My name is Mike Mayer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Benjamin's Desk, self-proclaimed epicenter of innovation in Philadelphia. Most of the reason by way of our location. We're located in the heart of Center City. We cater to mobile professionals, entrepreneurs, and startups. And we have great events like Startup Grind. It just so happens that I wear two hats. Being the co-founder of Benjamin's Desk, I'm also the Philadelphia chapter director for Startup Grind. For those of you guys who don't know, Startup Grind is a global meetup. We just hit our 100th city globally. Nice. And I just represent just one market here where we get a chance to interview amazing founders and have them share their experiences with you with the idea that the goal is to educate, inspire, and connect. And that's the goal here from what you'll hear from Ned today. I got to mention our sponsors. So we have a bunch of sponsors both for Benjamin's Desk and Startup Grind. For Benjamin's Desk, you'll see when you walk in on the TV there or the TV up there, Pepper Hamilton, there's the rep from Pepper Hamilton, Jeff's here. Eisner Amper, Steve Rob's here. TriNet, Bill, where's he at? There, Bill's here. So thanks so much for being sponsors of Benjamin's Desk. We also have amazing sponsors for Startup Grind, Comcast Business, who's also a Benjamin's Desk sponsor. The Neuro Drinks, the Slice Pizza, who else we have? Delphi Entertainment, Pretzel Crisp, and the list goes on. Then obviously we do the space here. My iPad got stolen, so typically I have my iPad with me, but I said, I'm just going to use my iPhone. I'm interviewing a mobile technology entrepreneur. Why can't I use my iPhone to do my interview today? So I'm not texting, I'm not being rude and asking Ned questions and looking down at my wife's text message. I'm actually reading my notes here. He has a very, very a long bio that includes him being a fellow Villanova University graduate. I did grad school, he did his undergrad there. He's been a technology entrepreneur and executive industry veteran for about 25 years. Pretty amazing stuff he's done over the years. He's an advisor to the technology committee for Safeguard Scientifics. He's also an advisor to the ICE Center at Villanova University, which I believe is Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship. Ned built a company for about 12 years called Portico Systems, which he sold to McKesson for about $90 million, not too bad. And now he's building an amazing startup called Clutch, which I'll tell you about tonight. And this guy has gotten about every award that you can have in the technology space. PBJ 40 under 40, Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year, most recently Pact Startup of the Year, and I think one or two other, Eastern Technology Council was another award you got. So without further ado, what we do globally, and this is kind of required for me, I'd ask you to stand up and just give Ned a warm Startup Grind round of applause.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this one.
All right.
Take this one.
I'm trying to sit down with that. Whoa, hurt myself.
These chairs are tricky. I warned Ned, so we wouldn't both fall at the same time. Okay. So welcome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for all that you do for the Philadelphia entrepreneurial and technology community. You've been doing it for a long time. This is your opportunity. I always do this. It's called an open mic. Feel free to address the crowd, say whatever you want.
Yeah, okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay, is that working? First of all, I want to thank Mike for bringing Startup Grind to Philly. I mean, like Mike said, I've been a Philly guy my whole life. It's really amazing to see what's going on in Philadelphia with the tech startup scene. It continues to grow and flourish, and a lot of that's from the hard work of guys like Mike and a lot of the people in the room, helping to support events like this. But it's truly an exciting time to be in Philadelphia right now. I was listening to, I watched some of the videos of Startup Grind. This is really just a great group. And, I've seen some of the other people that he's had, so I just want to set expectations. The bar might be a little low tonight, but the networking will be awesome. So, if you don't get too much out of the talk. So, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So I'm going to kind of keep the chronological order. Sometimes it's good to jump around, and we'll dive into a bunch of questions around general entrepreneurship. So if you're a first-time entrepreneur in the room, hopefully get some value, as well as glean on some nitty-gritty details by way of fundraising, having investors, and those things if you're a several-time entrepreneur. But going back to the beginning, Ned, talk to me about, were you always an entrepreneur? Did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Take me back to, pre-1990, 2000.
Yeah, sure.
How did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so the entrepreneur stuff going on back then, especially in Philadelphia, was not like it is today. I don't even know that we threw the word around that much. The reality of it was I was never really planning on being an entrepreneur, starting my own company. I graduated college, And I seriously, this isn't even a joke, I didn't think anybody would hire me at all. And I saw my friends going through this interview process, and I'm like, I could never sustain that many conversations with one person and actually impress anyone. So I said, if I start my own business, at least I'll have a job and I can, be able to pay the rent and do all those things. So really, it was from the very beginning, my situation was very opportunistic. And as we talk a little bit more about the companies, I can tell you how that happened too. But it was never really like I sat down and said, I'm going to go solve some crazy disruptive problem. Although we kind of do more of that now, and that's fun. But a lot of my experience has been relatively opportunistic along the way. The first job out of college actually was I worked on Broadway, so I have all kinds of crazy things in my past. I was not talent. We were working on digital sound design, so it was all, I was a struggling musician and I was highly struggling in that department. But we worked on bringing digital sound into the live theater setting. So right away, it was always about technology with me. Every company that we got involved with was how do we apply new technologies that are available to really kind of change the way people are doing things. And today that's kind of called disruption and all the rest of this stuff. But that's kind of where it was early on, I guess, that was my path.
Now, are you from Philadelphia?
I am. I'm from Philadelphia originally.
Whereabouts?
From Ambler, actually.
Okay.
So I don't know anybody. No, we have an Ambler person. All right.
Awesome.
Our new office is in Ambler. When I tell people we're in Ambler, they're like, "Where's that?" And it's actually a great town. They've done a lot of renovation, a lot of up and coming things happen.
So I interview a lot of people that have come to Philadelphia for a lot of reasons. Some usually family or school, one or the other. They stayed here, met their wife, met their husband or spouse, or they went to school here and decided to make Philadelphia their home. So it's always a pleasure to meet a greater Philadelphia guy who's built companies here and continues to stay here. And we'll kind of talk about stuff that Alex and I have had conversations around in terms of talent and where the action is, and what are the choices to build a company in the suburbs versus the city and things like that. Take me back to what were you doing before Portico Systems? We'll talk about Portico. What were you doing before then?
Yeah, so before Portico, like I said, I was on Broadway for a little while, and then I actually met my wife, and she said, "Look, if you really are serious about this, you better get like a real job because it was a lot of fun, but there wasn't a lot of compensation involved." So in any case, I moved back to Philly. That was the only time I didn't live here, was when I was up in New York. And after that, I came back and I took over a company that was the only company I hadn't started, was a family business, which was a fourth generation family business. So you can imagine kind of ownership. There were a lot of different kind of moving pieces. And it was purely manual at that point.
And was that business stagnant at the time? Was there a growth opportunity? Was there a turnaround opportunity?
It was pretty stagnant. It was in a distribution business that was kind of a declining market from a product perspective. So what we did was we had very high labor costs. We had organized labor. So there were a lot of things about the business that had high overhead with it. So we went in and bought everybody out, and then basically automated the entire process. So we brought technology to that company to essentially help grow that company without growing, some of the resource and labor costs that were pretty high in comparison to other competitors. So we did that. Learned a lot about cash flows, high volume cash flow business. That's been kind of one of my things I've learned early on is managing business is not about revenue and it's not about sales and it's not about technology. It's about don't run out of cash ever.
No doubt about that.
So that business was extremely helpful in that regard, learning all that. And then actually, while I was doing that, I started a construction company, a building company. And the thing there was to take technology into that market. So instead of just building a house, using project plans, using technology to talk to the customer so they knew exactly where they stood in the process.
On the commercial construction side?
It was residential and commercial.
Really?
And then we did that for a while, and then we actually started at the same time we had started what later became Portico. So I had 4 different kind of businesses going on at once, and I said this is just too many. So we shut down the construction company after we built our last project, and that's kind of where that was the Portico days.
Let's jump into Portico for the folks here. Tell us what Portico Systems was, and kind of, if it makes sense, frame it from the perspective of the original problem we were trying to solve for.
Yeah, sure. So again, in the opportunistic theme, in the late 90s, what we realized was there's going to be a huge change to business computing using web browsers. And so at that time, you got to understand the market was, everyone wanted to be eBay and Amazon, and everyone was looking at how can I retail things on the internet? What can I sell across the internet?
We're talking, what, 99, 2000 here?
Like 98, 99.
98.
So we decided to start a company around building business applications that run in a web browser because I don't know how many of you go back that far, but you know, the way software used to work in business applications was if you had 10,000 users and you wanted to upgrade the software, you had to go find 10,000 desktops and put a little exe file on it and upgrade. I mean, their whole business model is built around distributing exe files to upgrade, right? So we knew that the browser would change all that. So we really founded the company on building custom software applications that run a web browser. And so we did that. We actually built an office in the back of the warehouse that was a distribution company at the time, so we could work out of that. The original office had no windows in it at all, so it was really kind of crazy situation. I mean, it was funny in a lot of ways. We had a lot of fun with the fact that we didn't know what time of day it was and if it was raining or snowing or whatever. So we did that, and then dumb luck was one of our first customers was a startup health insurance company actually here in Philadelphia. It was not part of IBC's. It was actually part of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. They were coming into this market to try to compete. And once we started doing some work for them, we realized, man, this healthcare thing is really screwed up. And if we could learn this business model, we probably have a lot of product opportunities, because that was ultimately the goal, was to do some custom software development and then figure out if there were some product opportunities along the way.
And did you fundraise out the gate for Portico?
We did not. So we built the application, and what happened was we got stalled in our business plan. So the one thing, if I can leave you with one nugget here, if you start a company, whatever your original premise is, you can bet that that's definitely not going to be what you end up doing. That's at least been my experience. So take that off the table right away. So what happened was then all of the enterprise software companies that were out there, like Siebel and some of these bigger applications, started coming out with their web versions. And none of the people in the enterprise were really trained to use those things. So we actually cut over for a while and did straight third-party kind of implementation work, because the money was real good and we could do fixed price contracts, and we were winning against Accenture and IBM Global Services, and we were learning a lot about the healthcare business while we were doing that. And then the bottom dropped out in like early 2000s. Everything started going offshore. And
let me interrupt you. What do you attribute that to at that time, in that stage, going against a major consulting company? How were you guys beating them? It
was pretty crazy, right? Because you'd say, well, price is one way, but we actually were beating them because we understood how to do these things better than they did at the time. So their model was, as new technology.
Working in the back of a warehouse helps.
Working in the back of a warehouse. I'll tell you a really funny story about that when we get to our fundraising. But so we really knew what we were doing, and that showed a lot. So when we got to talk to the CIO or the CTO of a large company, they quickly understood that our technology team was capable of doing this. And the other thing that was crazy about it is, and I remember some of my partners early on, because we were pretty young at that time, and we were going in and pitching boards and senior management teams of multi-billion-dollar companies saying, you need to buy our services to implement the software, and we used to laugh about it because if those guys saw us 6 years before that, they probably wouldn't have given us $5 on the street. You know what I mean? And here we are, and you just remember, they put their pants on one leg at a time like we do, and we know what we're doing. And a lot of times we had to build our own confidence up to say, not to be, arrogant about it, but to say, look, we know what we're doing here, and we can provide value to this customer, and we know that we can do a good job. So, kind of interesting times with that.
We'll come back to the fundraising, but just something that I found really, really interesting, and this is like a recurring theme every time I interview a successful entrepreneur, is this idea of longevity and commitment and what it takes to really build a company. Ned started, you mentioned 98. The company went from 2000 to 2012. That's 12 years. I think so many entrepreneurs nowadays are interested in how to build a company with the idea of an exit in mind, as opposed to solving a problem and creating an amazing experience for customers, whether they're enterprise or consumer. So I have a little quick fact here, and for venture-backed startups, it's on average 7 years from the first financing to an IPO. And sometimes there's a lot of time until you get that first financing. So a decade is sometimes what it takes to build these companies. So talk to me a little about longevity and commitment and the ups and downs. You really have to have resilience to build a company like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we went through 3 companies along the way. We started this custom software development company, and then we became really a third-party implementation company competing with service companies like Accenture. And then we hit our product stride, almost, because we had to, because we were going to be some boutique consulting services firm, in the health insurance market, which didn't look overly attractive. Or we had a small little product in 2006 where we had 50 grand in revenue on it that we had retained IP rights. And again, being opportunistic, we went to the services company because it was opportunistic, and then that's when we really honed in on a problem that we really wanted to solve in the market. And because every company we started working with had major problems managing their provider information, just to get tactical. But it is all about resilience. And I remember, it's funny because, and even the Portico, once we took their financing, and I remember, I tell people that are going to business for themselves, it's like the highs can be so much higher than you think, than you're prepared for, right? I mean, like sometimes you're pinching yourself, like this is just so cool, I can't believe we're actually doing what I thought we could actually do. But in other times, like the lows can be a lot lower. I remember like at 11:30 one night coming home, and it was one of these crazy months, maybe string together. And I remember walking to the pizza shop, and I'm watching the guy making the pizza. I'm picking up pizza up to eat dinner at 11:30, and I'm watching him make the pizza, and I'm like, it would be so cool just to be the pizza guy right now. Like I make a pizza, put it in the oven, comes out, tastes awesome, and then I put the next pizza in. I'm like, that'd be so cool. Because it was just like, it does get hard, and there's points in time where you're like, and I just read an article online about this where, it gets, it can really get defeating, and a lot of times, like, how are we going to get out of this? And I think being an entrepreneur, you kind of thrive on that a little bit. Like, there's no problem that we can't solve, right? And I used to always look around at other people and say, if those people can do it, we can definitely do it. Right. And in some cases, if that person can do it, we can definitely do it. So. But it is just a lot about resiliency, and it is about just figuring out how you're going to solve the next problem in your business. So I mean, the other thing is creativity comes to mind, right? You hear a lot of talk about creativity, and there's amazing creativity in product design and UI, and even in more back office functions around data management. But I'll tell you, it's Wednesday and payroll's due Friday, and you don't have enough money in the bank. It's time to get creative, right? It's time to figure out what we're going to do so that everybody doesn't walk out Friday afternoon and you have a staff on Monday. So, creativity, I think, comes in a lot of different forms when you're trying to overcome all the different problems that you're going to have.
It's so funny you mentioned like several of these points, and until very recently in the startup technology community nationally, a lot of people weren't talking about this stuff. I think Brad Feld started talking about not just the ups, but there's the downsides of entrepreneurship. It's tremendously difficult. But in a sense, is that why you get up in the morning? I know that's why I get up in the morning. And although I'm down when I'm in the downs, but I'm up when I'm in the ups, I love the idea of waking up and trying to solve problems. Is that what drives you?
Yeah, I mean, completely, right? I mean, it's like if it was all down, we wouldn't do it at all, right? So it's the risk-reward thing. It's like knowing that there's those breakthrough times where you all of a sudden you're hitting stride and things are happening that are amazing. That makes it all worth it. So there's that, that persistence that you need to have to get there. But it's absolutely worth it. I mean, yeah. I mean, and it's funny because I think the earlier stage you are in the company, those moments are pushed closer together. So like with Clutch, I mean, when we first raised our seed funding, it was like in the day I'd have 4 or 5 different mood swings of like, I don't know how we're going to make it to Friday, and then the next minute I'm like, this is $1 billion company, and like, so you're like, I think we're a little manic, when it comes to stuff like that. I think you got to be, because I'm comfortable in that, I guess. You know what I mean? But it sounds crazy.
How much did you raise, and from who and when for your seed?
So the seed round at Clutch, we raised $1.5 million. We were a Ben Franklin technology company, so Ben Franklin supported us, which is great. And I think that program in the Philly area is going to do some great things. They just got another shot in the arm with the PA Innovation Bill, which is great news.
Raise your hand if you know Ben Franklin Technology Partners. They were probably the second most active funding source to first round capital in the region, and ranked even nationally. And they're the state-run, state-financed, venture-backed venture firm that's based out of the Navy Yard. Similarly, when Ned got honored for Startup of the Year with Clutch, Roseanne Rosenthal, is the CEO of Ben Franklin Technology Partners, was also honored for the Legend Award.
Yeah.
But great resource. If you don't know, check them out. I think they do a couple funding cycles a year for technology and for life sciences.
Yeah, it's a great resource. So we were Ben Franklin, then we had some friends and family and some folks who had invested with me prior. And then actually Safeguard Scientifics kind of hunted us down. And I give them a lot of credit because we weren't really looking to take institutional money in our seed round, but they were actually part of our Portico backers. So, and they were kind of following their normal process. So at one point I just said, look, if you guys are in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. I don't really care. We need to get moving. So they just like cut a check and said, here you go. So that's not usually the way it works. I mean, it's just because, we had worked with them in the past. So we raised about $1.5 million in that seed round. We're kind of all in is what we did.
We'll come back to some more financing stuff. I know a lot of people like to get in the nitty gritty of what that looks like. I recently read I was just perusing around, I came across Y Combinator. For those of you guys who know Y Combinator, Paul Graham founded it. It's probably the #1 accelerator in the entire world, based in San Francisco. And I was looking at their application for their accelerator program, and it's very, very explicit about, we prefer you have a co-founder. Like, we may take single-person companies, but we prefer you have at least one, if not two co-founders. Your first company, I know you had at least one co-founder, I believe, and with Clutch, I think you have two co-founders. Talk to me about the importance of a co-founder, and how do you know when you find the right one, and just, I think for the group's sake, go into the gravity of getting in bed with someone when you're building a business like this.
Yeah. So I think it's extremely important because I'm not a technologist. I mean, I understand technology and I understand how it works, but I'm not a coder. I can't build things like that. So for me, I'm always looking for a technology partner and a co-founder. And I think it's really, really important if you're going to be a tech company to have early technology chops as part of that founding team or very close to that founding team. Because at the end of the day, you're trusting that all the promises that you're making to the market are going to be able to be delivered on. So, and I'm the kind of person that, wants to make sure we're doing that, but at the same time, I also like to draw a vision and kind of, draw some bigger plans. So a co-founder, technology co-founder for me has worked well because they always pull me aside and be like, yeah, you need to stop talking now, like we can't do that. Or that's going to be really, really hard to do. I don't think you want to do that. So it is extremely important if you're a tech company because you do need that business and that tech component. And I think that needs to be, or at least if it's part of the founding team, you have extremely aligned interests early on in kind of the core major important parts of that business. I've been lucky in that regard because my technology co-founder at Portico is someone I knew for a long time, and he's one of the smartest guys in the region from a technology perspective. And then with Clutch again, it was part of the team that we formed, and I actually did not know Dan at the time when we founded the company, and so I actually had Scott call him up and say, what's with this guy? Is he any good? And Scott's like, this guy's a rock star when I got done talking to him. So, and my ex-partner doesn't throw around that term pretty easily. He's pretty hard to impress. So once I got that stamp of approval, I'm like, okay, whatever it is, we can probably make it work. And that's kind of how it worked out. So I think it's extremely important. It's very hard, I think, to be a single founder. Obviously, there's been stories that are successful that way, but it would not be my preference just because there's so much that goes on early on that you need people fully vested in the hard kind of startup grind time, that not having that person part of the founding team. And I've worked with smaller companies who try to hire that technology component, and it's really hard because you got to pay for it because this is the jewels of the company. And if you're paying for that early on, you're paying a lot of money if you're doing it right, typically. And I think it's just a tough recipe.
So let's dive deeper into the acquisition. So we talked about Portico early on. How'd you build the company? How'd the company iterate into several? We see that a lot. I mean, just by way of people links, and Alex has built a consulting company also, jumping into products at times. Chris Serra from ArcWeb. A lot of local companies that I know, founders start with consulting, and the products and the companies iterate, and next thing you know, you kind of find where you need it to be, and go from a service side to a product side. 12 years later, you sell Portico. Talk to me about the exit at the time in terms of the competitive landscape. What did the competitive landscape look like? Were there early conversations with McKesson? I'm always interested to see how long deals take, and some people think it just happens overnight. A lot of times it's several years in the making, several iterations as well.
I mean, you skipped the whole 12-year part of there. It was really hard, but we got to the exit. So we're going to concentrate on the good part. That's good. But you're right, and it's actually interesting the way it went down for us because I constantly talk to the potential acquirers in our markets all the time. So we're doing it right now with Clutch, as a matter of fact. And we don't talk about exit. We're not talking about partnership. We're talking about partnership, right? We talk about other ways we can work together. And it's really building rapport with these companies over time because it definitely does not happen overnight. And so in our case, we had been talking to a lot of the companies. We actually got approached to be purchased on 2 different occasions when we were doing capital raises at Portico. And so we had a decision to make at the time. Do we take the money now, or do we put our heads down and execute, try to move further along the timeline? In a couple cases, we decided to take the money, and we thought we could build more value, which ultimately we did, which looking back on it, we looked smart. At the time, we were like, oh my God, I hope this works. But that's kind of how it works.
Which isn't always the case, right?
No,
definitely. You see a lot of companies end up going bankrupt and turn down exits for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely not. So what happened? So what I kind of always try to do, and I feel like as part of our job, is that we need to be close to what's happening in the market, not only with the potential acquirers, but also on value creation, right? So what was going on with healthcare at the time was, as we all know today, the PPACA laws were coming out, and the healthcare reform laws were coming out. And we looked at the market, and I said, look, we have a window here of probably a couple of years where these bigger acquirers are going to be in the market, and they're going to be looking to place their bets around what's going to happen after all this legislation takes place. And then you're going to have a dark period of probably 3 or 4, of a few years. I mean, you don't really get the timelines exactly right, but there'll be this swell, and then there'll be a trough. So we either, are going to be looking at maybe now's the time for us if we can get an interesting multiple, or we're probably going to be heads down for another few years after that. And what happened was we got an inbound call from McKesson is actually how the process all got kicked off. And what's interesting is I wouldn't have had them on my list. Like if I made a list of the top 6 companies, they would not have been on my list at the time. And interesting because they're a huge healthcare company. I don't know if you know McKesson, but they're Fortune 14. They're in every payer, every provider. I mean, they have pretty big breadth in the market. But so once we got, and that call probably came in, in the summertime, I'll call it. And so we started talking about how do we partner with these guys, and that's really was the partnership. They called us because we had some technology that was interesting to their strategic plan. And once we understood what they were doing and what we were doing, they saw that we had a much broader plan than really kind of this one piece of functionality that they were looking for. And that turned into, well, listen, would you guys be interested in just, in us acquiring you? So that discussion got on the table probably in the September, October timeframe. And then once that happened, we said, well, yes, we have investors, we need to create liquidity, but if you're, if you're a financial buyer at the time, it's just not going to work. Because at the time, Portico wasn't even turning a profit; we were still burning cash, and so there's no real metric to measure that against. And they said, no, we think this is a strategic situation. Now, what really became good about all the investment we made in the prior couple of years with all the partnership discussions was we were rapidly able to pick up the phone and say, hey, you guys have expressed some interest in us in the past. We had a good rapport with all those teams, and we were able to bring people to the table, 4 or 5 discussions to the table to make sure that we were, really going to get the kind of deal that we thought was going to be right for the market at the time. And we didn't have to run a process. We didn't put a bid book out there. We literally made a few calls, hopped on a few planes, and we got 2 other term sheets. And as it turned out, McKesson ended up being the higher bidder. But in a lot of cases, I think they were the right fit for our company anyway, culturally, just on a lot of different levels that was going to make it successful as opposed to maybe a couple of the other people that provided term sheets. So that whole process, I think, we finally signed a term sheet in probably April timeframe. So, from the first inbound call, it was probably 10 months before we actually executed a term sheet. And then we moved to close very, very quickly. They were public, so we had all the kind of wait times and all the stuff that we had to go through with the SEC, but so that's kind of high level how everything kind of worked out.
Switching gears a bit to bootstrapping and fundraising, it's a topic that's often discussed and probably a little exaggerated. You've had the opportunity to see or do both. Any thoughts on bootstrapping or building a company on revenues versus fundraising early and timing, just in today's marketplace, as opposed to the Portico days?
Yeah, I would say go as long as you can without taking capital, right? Bootstrapping a company is going to create a lot of value for you. Now, the thing you need to consider, at least from my perspective, is that, what kind of company you're trying to build. Because if you're trying to build a product company, you are going to have to make some investments. So you do have to figure out how you're going to capitalize the product development, because it has to get far enough along that you can sell it, right? And a lot of times what we've done is it doesn't necessarily have to be far enough along that it's ready for GA, but you have to go to a customer and say, that first customer and say, look, here's what we've done prototyping wise, will you help us complete it? So you be up front that, hey, you're going to be first, and we think this is a great opportunity in the market. We've also done things like we've cut royalty deals with customers to help them recoup some of those costs, knowing that they're going to be first, and customers are sometimes reluctant to be the first. But I would say, if there's a way to bootstrap the company, you're going to create a lot more options going forward if you can do it. Once you take that first institutional round, things change a little bit, and you're what you need to do to maintain the company and what you need to do to keep the company moving forward, and your reporting requirements, and you have board meetings and all these different kinds of things, which are not bad things. They're things that take your time up as opposed to running the company. And so that is usually my preference. If you can bootstrap it far enough along, go ahead. But if you do have a market timing situation and a product situation, either you are going to raise the capital yourself through friends and family, or you do have to figure out how you capitalize that work. So I think it depends on what kind of business you're trying to kind of get off the ground too.
So for first-time entrepreneurs in the room, jumping right into fundraising, first-time entrepreneur, you think you have a good idea, you're starting to build a good team, you think there's some product market fit. And I'm not trying to put you in a box here, but what are some best practices as far as going about fundraising? What are some good things you can do if you think you know fundraisers, some early steps you can take to put yourself in a good position to fundraise?
Yeah, I think one of the key things to recognize about fundraising is that they're in the fundraiser, the venture capitalists and the money people are kind of in sales mode while they're talking to you, right? That they have money to place. They've raised money. They've committed to their limited partners that they're going to put this money to work if it's a private fund. So they have a need to get money out. The quickest thing that you want to try to start to evaluate as you're raising money is, what is the fit of this investor? Does this investor fit with what I'm trying to do? Because I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs kind of say, oh my gosh, well, Safeguard Scientifics or NewSpring, just to throw out some names in the Philly area, I know some guys over there and they're really interested. The problem is those guys want to cut a check for $5 to $10 million, and if you have a PowerPoint, that's not going to work. They want to see. But for a growth equity investment like that, they want to see revenue. They want to see things that you just don't have at that point in time. So if you're in a very early stage of the company, try to find investors who are used to investing in early stage companies. That's why Ben Franklin is a great platform here. So look for those kinds of investors. Not that you shouldn't talk to the other guys. It's great for them to be on your radar. It's like anything else, right? You want to build your network. You want to build rapport with those people. They also kind of know that you're out there. So as you start to make progress and you're ready to kind of take the next step, they've heard of you. They kind of say, wow, these guys have progressed along. So it's more of a story there. So it's not the first time they're meeting you. So I think it's time well spent with those guys. But I think if you really need to capitalize the company quickly, which early stage typically you do, you don't have a 7-month time window to try to go raise money. Quickly identify how those investors are going to fit with your time cycle. And even as you're growing, you get to that, maybe you've closed a few customers and you've got some revenue now and things are going well. Make sure you're finding how much money you actually think you need to raise and find investors that fit that profile, so that you're not asking a fund that, like a technology crossover that wants to cut a check for $50 million. You're not in there saying, hey, we need $2 million, because that's just going to be a short discussion. Really try to figure out the fit of the investor. Then the other thing I tell you is you want to understand where they are in the life cycle. If it's a private fund, are you at the beginning of the fund or are you at the end of the fund? That's an important thing to understand, because if you're at the end of the fund, there might be a lot of pressure for you to create liquidity a little bit earlier than you want. Because the way these funds work, if I'm getting too tactical here, let me know. But they're 10-year funds, right? So they have 5 years investment period and a 5-year run-out period. So if you're investing with a company who is their last money and their 7th year in the fund, and you're taking money from those guys, you really have a 3-year window. Maybe they'll run with you a little bit longer, where you're going to need to try to figure out how you're going to create some liquidity for that investment. And that might be the wrong time for your business, particularly if you're early on. So it's always nice to get into these funds when they're early in their life cycle or earlier in their life cycle in the first few years, because then you have a lot of runway with them to make sure that you're all aligned when it comes time to try to create the value and liquidity around that value.
And the answer to my next question was talking about alignment and how do you find the right investors. Do you have any really good or really bad stories about working with investors? I mean, Safeguard clearly likes you, which is a good thing. Any really, really good stories around how you knew you had alignment with Safeguard, or any potential investors that you just didn't see that were aligned properly?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think we always looked at the fundraising process as business partners, right? So, you get your founding team together and you're trying to figure out who's going to be, can I work with this guy? I mean, it's like a litmus test. Because if you're going to be in an early stage or an emerging company, you're going to spend a lot of time with your founders and theirs, right? So you better have fun and you better like the people you do it with. That's number one important thing, right? And we look at investors the same way, right? We're looking at them as partners, right? So these guys are going to be partners now. They're going to own part of this company, and we're going to together figure out how to maximize the value here. So we always looked at it through that lens. Are they culturally going to fit? Just like when you hire employees, are they culturally going to fit with your company? Are investors going to culturally fit with how you guys want to run the business? That's extremely important. And we had several occasions where, when we were doing our fundraising, that we talked to certain investment groups, and we're like, this is just, I don't care what the price is. There's no way I'm putting up with this person, right? If that's our lead person, because that person's going to end up on the board, and you're going to have to deal with kind of managing someone. So when you get into it, go into it with that lens also. We've got extremely lucky that Safeguard has been a phenomenal partner for us. and also Edison Venture Partners ran our B round at Portico, and they were very aligned with what we were doing. The other thing we looked at is the kinds of investments they make. So when we were at Portico, we were selling into the health insurance market, and I know some of the guys here are trying to do healthcare stuff. You know, sales cycles are ridiculous. Like, they're not long, they're ridiculous, right? Healthcare moves at like glacier speed, right? So, you know, and they're big contracts. So we had and our total target market was like 300 customers. So I would start our investment pitch that way. I'd say our target market's 300 customers, our sales cycles are 24 months, and we're hunting for contracts that are $1 million to $5 million. If no one fell out of their chair, we keep going, right? Because you're like, okay, if you can't handle that, like, I don't want to be in a board meeting trying to explain this to you. So, and we would say, if we get one extra contract a year, you're going to think we're rock stars, right? Because our revenue is going to be up way huge. If we miss one contract a year, you're going to think we're goats. So, you know, you have to be, as an investor, you have to be aligned with this is how our business is going to work. So I think it's really important, you know, alignment all across the board, culturally, the way the business model is working. And the best way to do that is look at other investments they've made, right? So, you know, we looked at Edison then. They're used to investing that way. Safeguard, the same thing. So we felt really good about that. And I think the last thing, you know, you talk about value, right? Like, what additional value can we get for the money? And there's a lot of talk about that, right? And I'll tell you that most of these investors are in complete sales mode when it comes to like the extra value they're going to give you as an entrepreneur. And we always went into it saying, I don't really expect any extra value. Like, my bar is like, if you're thinking about taking money from an investor because they're going to tell you they're going to open all these doors for your sales channels and everything else, please don't do that. Because, you know, they will open some doors and they'll do some things for you. Not that they won't do anything, but my bar was like, look, I don't need help getting access and selling our product and marketing our product. And we know how to do that, and we're going to continue to learn how to do that. But so to me, it was less about that and more about making sure that we had all these other alignment things right. Are you the right culture? Do you invest in these kind of companies? But Safeguard has been a phenomenal partner in that regard. They provided a ton of value. Things like they have lawyers on staff. So we send a bunch of legal work to them. They don't charge us. That's really good value add for me, right? I don't need them to we didn't need them to get us meetings with all these executives at healthcare companies. We knew how to do that. So don't be enamored, by all the extra value add that you think you're going to get, unless it's something really concrete that you know specifically is going to happen. Because I do think they provide a lot of value, but a lot of times they provide value in ways that you're not necessarily expecting. And so I'm kind of rambling a little bit.
Speaking of lawyers, Jeff, here's a question for you. Well, that's a question for Ned, but here we go. A lot of startups fail because of founder disputes. A lot of startups don't invest in corporate governance up front. Buy sell agreements and just having their ducks in a row, third-party valuations, all this stuff. You don't really want to talk about it up front. It's like, hey, if this company fails, who owes who money here? How much equity contribution have you brought to the table? What's your capital count look like versus mine? But it's good to have that stuff up front. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll give you first-hand experience about that. And I would say get a really good lawyer. That's the other thing I didn't say. Especially if you haven't done it before in a venture deal, because everything's up for grabs and everything is negotiable. So it's not like when you get a mortgage where the bank says, yeah, we can't change anything, you either sign here and that's it. There's a lot of things about the deals that can have radically different outcomes. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs get into making a venture deal particularly, don't understand all the moving pieces, how they work, and they're disappointed at the end when things happen and their expectations aren't met. So that's kind of a cap maybe to the previous discussion. But as far as founder stuff, I have firsthand experience in not doing this correctly. And I would say you have to do it up front when everybody's feeling good, right? I mean, you're like, hey, you don't want to talk about it. It's actually the best time to talk about it because everyone's jacked up and they're all, yeah, okay, great. We're never going to fire each other. We're never going to have to do any of this stuff, so it's going to be awesome. And, to work it all out then. Because I had a situation where I had a partner actually in a company prior to that became Portico where we did not have any of those things set up correctly. He was a childhood friend of mine. And we ended up having to fire him, and he sued me for 37 counts of fraud and all this crazy stuff. So, it was all made up and it was all fabricated, and we ended up having to settle it. But it took us, a couple years, and it took us, it took a lot of eye off the ball in the business at the time, right before we kind of got into the whole Portico story. So that's probably the extreme example. I don't think that always happens. He was a pretty unreasonable person, frankly. But at the end of the day, that takes a lot of time and energy away from doing anything productive to try to build the business. So I couldn't agree with you more to get that all set up early and up front, and you can save yourself a bunch of headaches later, and more importantly, save the business and all the people that are working hard in the business.
So that clearly was not a leading question, but the fact that Ned is willing to share with you, I think that's the beauty of Startup Grind. You talk about the education and the inspiration, the connections. The fact that he's giving you a real world example of how things can go wrong, and they will, you need to really protect yourself. So Jeff's in the back. Please see the Pepper Hamilton attorney smiling back there. He'll help you out.
I'm doing my best up here, Jeff. Am I doing all right?
Before we dive into Clutch, I want to talk about this basically a selfish question, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's this idea of team, the idea, and product market fit. Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz will make the argument that product market fit is the most important of those three things. However, you see a lot of companies that achieve product market fit and will still fail. Maybe they find the sizable market, but the addressable scope is too small. Talk to me a little bit about what your thoughts are on team, idea, and product market fit.
Yeah, it's a great topic. I think maybe what Mark's talking about there is that if you have a great team, you're going to find the right market fit. And to me, it's not. To me, the team comes first. So, and I mean that because, like I said in the beginning, whatever your business plan is, if you sit down and actually write a business plan, which I never really have done, in total transparency, but the thing is, whatever you set out to do is going to be not what you do. And your team has to be strong enough and open enough and be able to work together in a very effective way to quickly figure out how you're going to pivot into really what the real opportunity is. It's and so to me, it's like the team comes first, and then you can figure out the product fit later because you have people that are extremely motivated, passionate, smart, and understand that we're all trying to get this thing off the ground. And if you can get the power of that team happening, then that's, I think, where the magic happens. And then once you kind of lock onto that product idea, they'll be very passionate talking about it, and they're very genuine and authentic. And I think that's what customers want to hear. They want to know that you're in business to help me solve my problem. And so I think team is the single most important thing. And I also think it's something that just doesn't happen, right? I think a lot of times, intellectually, we know, hey, how many times have you heard I just hire people that are smarter than me, right? And in my case, that is way true. But intellectually, it's kind of easy to think through that and say, yes, of course that makes sense, right? But you hire 4 people that are smarter than you and they can't work together, you have complete and utter chaos. And you spend your whole entire day like being a ref or being a parent sometimes, to these people. And it's funny, at one point I remember early on in the Portico days, I was like, man, I should have taken a psychology class at college. Like, I didn't do any of that stuff. And I'm like, that would be so helpful right now because people are coming to my office and like asking me all these, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to solve this. Like, go talk to them or something. And I started learning those skills. Like, I had to learn some of those skill sets, like how to coach people through stuff where you just can't inject yourself. Because if you end up injecting yourself all the time to solve the situation, they don't learn how to solve it themselves. And if you're not around, it is utter chaos when you're not there. So building the team, and I think for me, it's really around kind of the core values, right? And you hear a lot of discussion around, core values, and I see a lot of things hanging on the wall here that are awesome values. But
I made them up.
It's great. Be brave is phenomenal. That's a great one. I was going to steal that one, maybe. But at the end of the day, it's like they can't be words on the wall. And I get I like the feeling in here that it's not. It has to be how you make the decisions in the business. That's where I think the magic happens. That's just my personal opinion. But we have values at Portico. We have 4 values at Clutch, and one of our values is be amazing, keep it simple. So keep it simple is an easy thing to say when we're developing products, right? We want it to be really simple for people to use products. Well, how about when we're talking to the customer? We get a sales deck and it's like, oh my gosh, I need to be a PhD. I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. The words are so big, I can't even understand this. It's like, don't use buzzwords to make it sound good, right? It's like, be simple. So that's something that goes through our entire grain of the company. And that helps the team rally around how to build the team themselves, because now they know how to operate and they know how to make decisions when you're not there, because we've built these values around us making decisions. So one of our values at Portico is do the right thing. And we didn't qualify it. It wasn't do the right thing for the customer, because sometimes the customer may be being unreasonable, right? So we got to figure out how to protect ourselves in some cases. But at the end of the day, and people will come into my office, and they come flying in my office. And I remember one story where we had our KPI set up for the support team where they had to hit certain gross margin targets. and the sales guys obviously need to hit sales numbers, right? Well, that is a conflicting, set of goals, which is on purpose, right? Because you want that tension. So they come flying to my office, they're like, here's the deal, and the customer says they're only going to buy it for this, and they have a gross margin target, and we have our bookings numbers and all this rest of stuff. And I said, time out. I said, let's do the right thing. What's the right thing for the customer here?
That's
and everyone
awesome.
was like, so you really have to ingrain it into the decision making. So building teams as a whole, I mean, that's a big topic, but I think it's extremely important. There's a lot of things as a founder you can do to build a team, and there's a lot of things as a founder you can do to tear the team apart. So I would say anybody that's on that journey, find a mentor, find someone that you can bounce things off of, that you can tell anything to, even all the stupid little interpersonal stuff, because that's where the magic or the cancer happens, and really pay attention to that.
I'll tell you, as a former naval officer, I think that's spot on. It's phenomenal advice. Core values, doing the right thing. It's the way to do business, especially in 2014, where you have young millennials who strive for transparency, and they want to see this in everything that they do. Getting the Clutch, amazing website, amazing app. I mean, talk about it's simple, you understand it. Tell us what you were trying to build at the time you conceptualized Clutch. What was the pain you were trying to solve for, potentially for the consumers as well as retailers?
Right. So we kind of really found it around the consumer piece, but knew that we were going to have a B2B platform that we wanted to. And really the pain was I had 55 cards in my wallet, and I don't want to carry this stuff around anymore. Was kind of physically where it started. But then it turned into, boy, I'm a pretty big consumer with some companies, and I'm not part of their loyalty program, and they know nothing about me, and I really want them to know about me, not the ones that are trying to market to me like through, through finding out who I am. But I'm actually willing to opt in with some of these companies I do business with, because I'm a good customer, and I'd like to be recognized for that. So really the whole idea around the platform was to bring together mobility, because I think mobility provides a very interesting opportunity to solve some of these problems, right? So how do you bring together loyalty? And gift cards was another thing. I have gift cards in my drawer I don't use. I don't know if they're expired, so.
Yeah, it sounds like I remember Joe telling me stuff, and I was shocked. I mean, there's like $1 billion worth of gift cards that go unused a year or something, sitting in people's drawers.
It's tens of billions.
Tens of billions.
It's crazy. So $100 billion in gift cards last year in the United States got sold. 30% of those cards will go unredeemed. So you think about that opportunity, and so that's what we said, okay, well, loyalty is great, and so is this gift card thing of people like getting these things. And not only that, gift cards was the last really, truly anonymous marketing program, right? If I go into a store and I buy a gift card, you might know it's me because I use my credit card, but if I give it to Jerry, the brand has no idea that I gave it to Jerry. They know nothing about him, and he probably has an affinity to the brand because I gave it to him, right? So it's really, truly, and it still is anonymous on a lot of levels today. So we kind of set out to bring together a mobile platform that would bring together loyalty, gifting, and then shopping. So now that I have all these things, how can I execute shopping on my mobile device with my loyalty information, with my gift card information, whether I want to buy a product right on my phone or I want to scan something in the store and use those credentials. So that was kind of the idea, right? Let's build a platform that's going to solve that. And there's a lot of platform implications there. And then the other thing, as we were talking about this, we were saying, this is actually a really good platform for brands just to white label pieces of this. And we knew that brands were trying to get into mobility, and businesses, not just brands, because we do retail, but we also do other businesses. But the one focus we kept was we want their final customer to be a consumer, right? We felt like if you were selling to consumers, that creates some complexity, and the mobility piece of that is really a big opportunity. So we built the platform so that it was white labelable, so we could have business customers use pieces of the platform and different components they wanted to use to quickly get them into the mobile market without having to build their own app, figure out all these other things that they wanted to do, but give them some good core functionality around that. And that was really the jumping off point. So there was a lot of focus on our consumer app initially because we wanted to jump into market, we wanted to get some users, start watching consumers and how they did it. But
did you go native? Did you go native first when you were building this product?
We went iOS first, and we went native originally, and then we started using tools. So on the Android side, we started using Appcelerator and things like that that would make it easy across platforms. But with the iOS stuff, we're doing that native.
And do you think that was the right decision at the time?
I do. I think there were some things we wanted to do in the UI and some things that were just at the time, because even 2 years ago, like responsive design today, HTML5 looks a lot different than it did even a couple years ago. There were some things in the UI that we wanted to do from a rich UI perspective that were just going to be too difficult. And I think because there was so much, think about it, right? We have a consumer platform that you can load your loyalty cards into, load your gift cards into, load your phone, you can load your license, you can load any card you want in your wallet, get rid of it. You can also search 200,000 daily deals a day, match that up with content you have in your wallet. We have an entire deals platform. You can shop 20 million products on the phone. You can friend your friends on Facebook and confirm friends and have shopping feeds and watch what they're looking for and tag it, right? A lot of stuff, right?
Wow.
So you go to a consumer and say, here's what Clutch is. They're like, oh my God, right? So the idea was, we had to get some really interesting UI things so that you just didn't confuse the hell out of somebody. And I think that's why one of our core values early on was keep it simple, because there's a lot going on, let people discover different parts of this. But that's one of the reasons we decided to go native.
It's so funny because some of the best entrepreneurs I've been meeting with lately, they constantly harp on how having a good UI person in today's world, because everything needs to be simple, you have about 4 seconds for a consumer before they go to your app or your web page before they're looking at something else, the attention spans. Was there one feature that you knew you had to have like right off Jump Street that was, I think, critically important?
Well, I think part of the challenge with the consumer model for our business, frankly, has been there's multiple entry points, right? So we were really fixated on the gift card for a big part of it. And then a company, Gift, came out, which kind of helped us. I don't know if any of you guys know Gift, but that entire business is to digitize gift cards. So that was good because they were spending a lot of money. They got West Coast funding, and I'm all about having other companies spend money developing a market that we're going to be in. So that actually helped in that regard because they were on Ellen DeGeneres' show. So people were like, oh wow, I can put gift cards in my wallet now. But now what consumers do is they go out and look at a bunch of different things, and we were there too, right? So that helped a lot. But the entry points were, I want to get rid of my loyalty card. I want to carry that around. I get rid of my gift card. I want to shop for daily deals. I also want to comparative shop. So there's about 4 or 5 entry points into our app. So the UI being super clean and easy to use to get to all these different things in one click was a pretty big design challenge. I agree with the UI people are extremely important.
Real-time balances? Can you do real-time balance checks on your
We can
cards?
on a lot of them,
Wow.
not on all of them, but we're actually, a lot of that's brute force. So we're building that as we go on the loyalty balance side sometimes too, depending on what's going on.
Wow.
Now, we've evolved. So that was kind of, you asked me kind of the original idea. We've kind of evolved into a broader platform today. But
what are the biggest challenges you face right now with Clutch, and what are the biggest opportunities?
So the biggest challenges we face right now is, like any company, we are an emerging technology company that is a small company. We feel like we're creating a new space. That's the other thing I'd say to you. If you're going to start a startup, change the world. Like, start to change the world. You're going to focus into a niche, and you're going to focus into your business model. But start big. Like, start with a big idea and figure out where you're going to go. Like I said, you'll figure out where you end up. So our biggest challenge is when you do that, and I've always had the opportunity to work with phenomenal people that are really good at this, which is how do we talk about existing markets and how do we create our new market that's not so different that nobody wants to talk to you. Right. So how do you create an adjacent market? And what we're doing today, for our concrete example, like Clutch, it's very easy to see us as a loyalty provider. And there's a ton of loyalty companies out there. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to coin next generation, which is we're calling customer success. How do you create more successful customers? And we feel this should be a category that businesses start to measure themselves on. And there is a movement in customer success around SaaS-based businesses because of the churn. And we're basically taking that customer success B2B market and saying, those principles for those companies should be applied to your consumer customers.
Thought leadership, that's awesome.
Yeah, so how do you do that? So our biggest challenge is, being a small company, not having, a whole ton of resources. How do we continue to talk to the analysts and continue to create that market in a way that's meaningful?
And then I think it's always interesting when you're dealing with the consumer side of stuff, talking about, we're going to change the way consumers do X, Y, and Z, and saying partners or investors are going to say, you're going to change consumers? That's really difficult to do. But I mean, in a sense, you guys are predicting consumer behavior 3 years from now. I think everybody's going to use Clutch. You see Coin, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Coin out of the West Coast, similar model in terms of don't carry all the credit cards, have one piece of credit, and that has all your credit cards on there. So definitely an interesting marketplace. I'm going to skip a bunch of questions. This has been amazing. I'm going to get right to some rapid fire for you. Okay. Do you have a favorite book or a book you read recently that was interesting, or an article?
Yeah, I mean, when I read, I try not to read any business stuff, honestly, because you get enough of that during the day with blogs and all the things you're reading online. So I read a lot of crazy, stupid fantasy stuff, and just check out. I got to get out of my head. But aside from those kinds of books, I think one of the books that I kind of always seem to refer to, and not by design, I thought it was a decent book, but is Blink. I don't know if you guys have ever met Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, but
Gladwell.
people talk about going with your gut and what's that mean. And I thought he did a very good job in that book, kind of bringing some science to that whole thing. And it is true. I got to tell you, we've made hires where I'm like, this person is perfect on paper. They're saying all the right things, man, but like there's something wrong here, and I don't know what it is. And every time you have that feeling, it's just wrong. And same thing with a lot of things in business. Like if you just feel like, well, that's just, the product shouldn't really work that way, you know what I mean? It probably shouldn't work that way. So to me, I find myself referring a lot to that. So if you haven't read that book, I think it's a great read. It's a quick one too.
Do you have a favorite social media channel? LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever?
I like Twitter. I like Twitter a lot. I think it takes some of the, I can be a voyeur there a lot with, and it really kind of helps me distill the news feed stuff. So I like Twitter.
Yeah, me too. Favorite hobby outside of working?
Favorite hobbies, playing golf or scuba diving, one or the other. So.
Nice. Acquisition or IPO for Clutch? You don't have to answer that one.
TBD.
In light of my soccer background, the World Cup approaching, American or European football?
I would have to go with American football. Though I'm warming up to soccer. I'm finding myself watching some of it. Yeah.
Good. It's still early. Soccer is the best sport in the world. Real fast, last question. I want to talk Philadelphia. You mentioned that the tech scene's really starting to heat up. Where do you see Philly in the national landscape? And nationally speaking, do you see a tech bubble approaching? So two-pronged question there.
Yeah. So Philly in the tech scene, I think, has a lot going for it. I think, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Philly guy. I think, we are right, the Boston to DC corridor, we're like, we have awesome access to a really huge part of the U.S. market right here. Our cost of living here is extremely reasonable compared to New York and some of these other places that, that startups can start up. I think the talent pool is great. And I think also, things are starting to happen like around early stage money. I think the biggest issue probably up to 5 years ago was early stage money in Philadelphia was extremely hard to get and extremely hard to find. It was either like you kind of had a network of individuals that were high net people, otherwise there really wasn't a whole lot. So that's starting to change. Ben Franklin and some of the new things they're doing there. The city has their fund. I don't know if you guys saw that. So I think there's a lot of things that are starting to prop up that early stage. So I think Philadelphia has a lot going for it. The question will be, can we capitalize on that and really market that in the national scene to really create what I think is a big opportunity? TBD, we'll see. I think the boys over at Comcast can help a lot too, with the new building they're putting up there. That's great to see that they're really showing up in the city as a presence. We'll see how that turns out. As far as is there a tech bubble coming,
you've been in the game a long time, right? And right. I'm a newbie here, but some of these valuations are just getting, extremely absurd. When you look at the value a company like Ford Motors or General Electric might create in their marketplaces, building real products that serve real industries. And you look at it, we have customers, we don't have revenue, a la Instagram, Snapchat, in the billions of dollars. And they're about to stack up. There's about to be, I would say, in the next 18 months, you're going to see 10 more unicorn companies that are hitting the billion-dollar valuations. Yeah,
what's interesting, what's different about it this time is, and this is why it's going to be hard to figure out, if they start IPOing those companies, then I think we have to start watching, right? Because if you're IPOing companies at multi-billion-dollar valuations that aren't making money, at some point, we've already proven that before, that doesn't work, right? And I'll go back to the first statement I made, don't run out of cash, and at some point you got to make money. And if you're in a multi-billion-dollar company, you're not making money, you're not going to at some point all of a sudden be magically being able to do that. But what's happening this time around, which is really interesting, is they're not IPOing these companies for the most part, right? You're seeing these companies are getting bought by the bigger companies that have cash, like the WhatsApp purchase. You just scratch your head, right? Especially if they're true to form and say we're never going to do advertising on that platform. So how do you monetize 350 million people if you're not going to advertise to them? So two things are either happening. They're either lying and they're eventually going to advertise to them to get some value out of the $16 billion they paid for it, or I don't know how you get value out of a price like that. So I think if these companies continue to buy these companies up at crazy valuations, what you're going to see is those companies' values are going to start to diminish because their cash pots are going to go down. They're going to get, they're going to have dilutive type things if they're raising capital in public markets to do that. So, it could be a longer tail on this one, or is there so much value that's been created in companies like Facebook that they can absorb some of this and, not really create too many issues if they continue to create value. So there's a lot of different kind of ways to look at it. If these companies start IPOing, I'd start getting nervous though.
to get cash without going to investors. Can you explain a little bit the mechanics of that?
Sure, and that's a really good way to do it. I mean, I've coached some other companies to do that too. So basically what we do is we say, hey, if you were going to buy a license for our product and it was fully GA, I'll make a number up. You know, it might be $1 million. So we're not GA.
GA for the crowd.
Generally available. So that means the product's been fully tested. It's been through beta, testing. So it's really, it's going to be a piece of software that is going to operate a mission critical part of your business and not fail, right? So if you were going to license our product, it would cost you roughly, I'm making a number up, $1 million. If the product's not completed yet, why don't you pay us the license up front? You're also going to have some service implementation, things like that. So maybe you give us another $500,000, $750,000. Now, what we'll do is, for the first, you don't want to time it out. You don't want to have it an evergreen situation. But you say for the first 5 years, after we start selling the product, or 3 years, whatever the time frame is, we'll give you guys a 20% royalty on all the licenses that we sell. So you carve out services because you got costs and everything else. But as far as selling licenses go, we'll give you 20, 30% of the license until you've recouped your money. Once you've recouped your money, if it's still within the window, we'll give you a residual of another 10%. And a lot of times what you find out is these bigger companies, they don't want to be in the software business, right? I mean, they just want a piece of software that's going to solve their problem, what they're trying to do. So this is a great way for them to say, hey, we want some innovation. We want an innovative platform. Nobody has it today. We're going to create some value for ourselves. We could recoup our entire investment back, and we might have a little bit of a revenue stream going forward. Those kinds of things we've been pretty successful in doing. Now what you're seeing now is corporate investment companies are starting their own investment and venture groups. So you might even have an opportunity to go in and actually raise pure venture money within a strategic. And they're actually getting extremely competitive. It used to be that they weren't too competitive because they would say, we're going to help you build the business, so we want value for that. Now they're getting very competitive. The issue you got to look at there is, do I want this company owning part of my company, and what's that say to the rest of the market? Which can be very effective or depends on the circumstance. So is that helpful?
And I work in nonprofit fundraising, and I have a belief that there could be a real synergy between the social networks of social benefit organizations and the creativity, the innovation of startups. But oftentimes, it seems like we're just over our head trying to keep, or just trying to keep our head above water, and we'll do something good later. And I'm wondering, I get the impression that you've been involved in doing good from the beginning of anything you've done, and I wonder if you see that as an integral thing to bring together from the start, or if it's an optional add-on.
Yeah, interesting question. I have, I would kind of say that if it's not part of the DNA, it's hard to make it part of the DNA later, right? With anything, and that's certainly a big thing. Because, let's face it, there's never enough time, money, or people for anything, even big companies. And certainly in startups, that's like the extreme example. So if it's something we're going to get to later, that's basically the parking lot, the graveyard parking lot, right? We're never going to get to that. So it's either important enough for the company to figure out how they're going to integrate it. Take a company like Tom's Shoes, right? Like that was part of the core part of the business. And I think, it's either going to be part of the DNA and we're going to figure out how we work it in. It might be in small steps in the beginning, right? Because we can't make huge bets on the nonprofit side. But if it's really core to what we're doing or that important, my thought would be figure out a way to get it in early. Otherwise, it's hard to work that stuff in later, at least, off the top of my head.
First of all, I think a question everyone's been wondering is, do you ever consider going back to that pizza place?
I do go there frequently still, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny. I still remember the minute I walked in and felt like that every time I go in there.
But my more serious question is, I know you've talked a lot about how it's important to kind of build a team and find partners that you can easily work with, and that you don't have to get into awkward situations. But is it ever a concern that you might surround yourself with people you get along with a little too well and kind of make like this echo chamber of like, well, that's a great idea. Yeah, everything you say is great. Let's not work with that. Like you risk not working with people that challenge you for your ideas, and you actually have to fight for it.
We talked about that earlier, right? When we first got here,
Yeah.
challenging hypotheses.
Right, you definitely run the risk of that, right? So don't surround yourself with yes people. And I'll give you a quick 2-second story, is that I would never want to do that. And our team, I spend time on our team making sure that everyone has trust in everyone else. So there's no politicking going on or anything like that, so that when those discussions come up, And I remember the first time we hired a new person into our senior team at Portico, and this person was from Cigna. It was, Cigna's a big company. And I don't know if I could say names on here, but a big insurance company
Yeah,
that not to be named. Not Cigna, was a different one. So in any case, she comes into our senior meeting, and now a lot of these bigger companies have meetings to have meetings, and they prep before they go to the senior people. And I've been part of this process, which is insane, but it's like, you're going to say this in the meeting, we're not going to talk about that, and all this. So you literally have 2 meetings before you get into the senior meeting. So this is the world she came from, right? So we get into our senior team meeting, and our COO at the time and me get into a pretty passionate discussion about something that was going on in relationship to the product and the product roadmap. And we used to do it all the time, right? I mean, and it was, this particular one was extremely passionate. And so at the end of the meeting, we walk out, because we're totally cool. I get, the only ground rules are, it's got to be, we're trying to get to the right answer for the company, and don't cross any personal lines, right? Besides that, you can say anything you want, anytime. And so we walk out of the meeting, and she comes flying to my office, and she's like, "Oh my God, are you and Sam all right?" And I was like, "We what?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Everything's fine." She's like, well, do you want me to talk to him? I'm like, "No, we're gonna go have lunch." She's like, "What?" And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, no. I'm like, "Nancy, this is the way it works around here. You don't hold anything back. Everything's cool. We're good. You know what I mean?" But it just, so you got to surround yourself with team members that are gonna definitely challenge not just you, but the other team members. And it's hard because interpersonally, people have different boundaries, and you got to really, work on making sure that people feel comfortable enough to do that in that environment.
Awesome stuff. Best idea wins culture. Bill?
Great stuff, Ned. It takes time to build a company, but you also talked about how, initially what you go in for, it's not going to be there, plan on pivoting. So what are a couple things where you just know you have to make the right move? What hits you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's why the book Blink is pretty good, because you want to trust your gut in some of this. Right. But, at the end of the day, it comes down to being opportunistic, right? And what is the right opportunity at the time? And you make a lot, I make a lot of wrong choices. Our team does too, right? So the other thing I'd say is, don't try to bet it on one thing, right? Early on, obviously focus is king, and you want to make sure you got the right focus, and you definitely cannot be mediocre at 10 things and have a great company, right? But it's also okay to plant a few seeds along the way and say, okay, we're having this discussion, that discussion, that discussion. It's like the signal to noise ratio, right? Tons of noise out there, and I don't know where the signal's coming, but it's coming somewhere, and we gotta, put a few beacons out there. So I would say don't bet on one thing, and that will become clear. And then as those things start to happen, that's when you start evaluating them, right? And you start saying, whoa, we didn't expect this over here, and this might be a really huge opportunity that we should take advantage of. And then you look at the market and say, wow. So it's really, I think, putting your fingers in a few different things, until you lock on. Once you lock on, then you're kind of pot committed, right? Then it's kind of like, once you get over the point where you're an emerging growth company, you're going to do other things to expand the value of the business and things like that. But then it becomes a business. You're less a startup, and you're more kind of like, we just need to go kill this now, right? So, that make sense?
Last question.
Yes, Evan Cleary, no separate lives. We're currently approaching our first round of fundraising. I was wondering, what is the best method of identifying an appropriate investor, and how would you recommend you go about approaching them?
So again, I would look at fit, and you can do a lot of research online, right? You don't have to talk to a lot of people to see that, right? You can look at their investments. A lot of these companies are very, forthright about their portfolio. So I'd look at other companies that might be adjacent in this space, right? So look at other medical device companies, and that might be, not implantable metal device, or whatever you have. If it's an implant or if it's an whatever, look at those companies, look at their investors, because a lot of times in their board of directors, you can figure out who their investors are. And then you can also usually tell who the early guys or late stage guys simply by looking at the investor, right? So once you get the list of investors, go check out the website. If it's, hey, we're a growth company that, does whatever, or hey, we do startup, you can find out pretty good. You make a list, and then it's pretty much networking, and I think you can use a lot of your advisors and a lot of your service providers, and if you're working with attorneys and accountants and things like that, a lot of those guys who are in that market know a lot of those people. So it's kind of brute force networking once you get your list together.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can we give Ned a round of applause?